Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning, and it is always a treat when we get to speak with authors who impact our community, but they just don't live next door. But today's one of those days we get to speak with Casey Van Norman. She's the author of Nothing Wasted. God Uses the Stuff You Wouldn't. Good morning, Casey.
Oh, good morning, Susie. Thank you so much for having me on the show. What an honor.
Wow,
Thrilled.
It's our honor, and I love the title, first of all, Nothing Wasted. I've always said that to kids who they might start off college majoring in something and change their mind midway, and we always say to them, well, nothing's wasted. You'll use that. You have a different meaning. What is it?
Yeah, I'm talking about the whole picture of our life, past, present, future, and a God who is completely in charge of all of it and sovereign over all of it, even the parts that we would not readily want to look at. And in that, I mean, not just the horrific, painful, first things you think of as the things I wouldn't want to look at, the embarrassing regrets of my life, but also talking about the parts of us that are just normal and boring and average and mediocre, and the parts of us that fold clothes all day long or stay home with our kids or wait in the pickup line at school or go to the grocery store. How is God using all of these intricate parts of my life and the parts that are so personal and sacred, maybe that I haven't even given voice to yet? How is he using that for not only his grand purpose, which is mainly, but also for me to know him and know his will and be satisfied totally in him?
Yeah, and content. Let's start with the boring part, because I think that resonates with a lot of people. And then maybe, if you're willing, we'll work ourselves into the more painful parts. But let's start with boring. How, I'm going on no sleep. I've got an infant at home. My days are filled with feeding somebody and cleaning them and doing laundry and changing diapers. And really, my devotion life is next to nothing. It's a quick prayer whispered, pretty much a one-word one, help. How is that glorifying to God? How is that walking in his way for my life?
I always think about the two sparrows. So in that season of, my kids are 14 and 11 now, and we're really in the thick of busy, and they're independent, but I certainly had those years where my husband would leave and go to work, and I'm here with these two kids, and I'm just a professional wiper, and I'm wiping counters, and I'm wiping noses and rear ends and all of it, and I haven't changed my clothes in 2 days or taken a shower in, 5 days. And you're going, and then your husband walks in, and you have all of these words, and he doesn't have any, and so we do go through, and I remember just weeping in my closet with, leftover chocolate milk and animal crackers, and going, how am I of benefit to anyone in my life, much less God's eternal purposes for my life? And he would constantly bring me back, and I would see, and I'm encouraging anyone who's feeling that way, just in that boring job, doing the mundane, average things every day, to picture those two sparrows, just random birds that seem completely irrelevant to the glory of God. And yet Jesus tells us in Matthew 10 that are not these two sparrows that are only sold for a penny, not even one will fall to the ground apart from the Father. And I love that picture of Jesus, who just sees all of these things as his purposes. And I find so much relief in a God who doesn't need me but wants me. And so when I began to change the perspective of how I'm relating to God as a God who, he's got this whole thing, every cell, every, part of the atmosphere, everything that's happening is completely in control. And he doesn't need me to spin this world, but he wants me to be a part of it. And it really sets me free to relax and enjoy and find so much grace upon grace in the small little seemingly meaningless details that will matter forever. And I cling to that, and that's the message of the book and the kind of boring parts of us, that everything matters forever, even those, seemingly irrelevant things like the sparrows of our life.
And I love that you've put that in a picture that even the busiest of moms can get in their minds. Two sparrows.
Mm-hmm.
You've got time to think of two sparrows when you're in the middle of the chaos of preschoolers and newborns and everything going on, to stop and feel loved and just breathe, huh?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for putting that even more clearly. I love that picture. And so I just hope somebody sees that, when they feel like either they're going too full out or, not doing enough, that Jesus has really fully finished all of the work for us. And so we do get to enjoy this life. In fact, that's the big question that I'm asked so often on the road and as a professional counselor. The main question is, what is God's will for my life? And Psalm 37:4 tells us to delight ourselves in Him, and He will give us the desires of our heart. Well, those desires are Him. The desires we want, ultimately, are whatever He desires, because that's the predetermined foreknowledge of eternity that He can align us with and bring us into His own mind. So in order to know the will of God, it's so simple, we want to make it so hard, but it really is to delight in Him, to enjoy who He is. And so just look, if it takes 2-3 years of raising your babies at home and living on a shoestring budget and eating ramen noodles for 3 years, enjoy God there. If you're out boss ladying it and you are running things and leading organizations, yes, girl, do it. But enjoy God there. So I love that, because that enjoyment and delight of Him is really what's going to sync us up with the will of God.
Well, you said yourself, you're right now in the throes of maybe one of the busiest seasons ever, with teens and everybody going a million different directions. When in the world did you find time to write a book?
I don't know. I really don't. I think some people, this is my third book and my fourth Bible study series, and I think some people have it so much more together than I do. They really do. I have zero team or staff or anything like that. There's no big ministry thing but behind my name. We just do really everyday life. I'm a professional counselor, and I work in reentry and addiction and trauma, and I work mainly with inmates coming out of incarceration on a daily basis. And so we just have, we go to baseball practice, and I Google my kids' homework answers and all of the normal things, that moms do. But this book really was birthed out of about 10 years of hindsight. And I actually attempted to write this book 10 years ago, and it failed miserably. It was rejected numerous times by publishers, and that's because it wasn't the book that God, it wasn't ready. It wasn't, it wasn't seasoned enough, because this is saying God uses the stuff you wouldn't. So I really needed to be on the other side of so many painful episodes and experiences of my past in order to fully see how specifically God has used these things.
Yeah. Well, let's go there a little bit. First of all, as a counselor working with people doing reentry, what a message for them that God uses stuff you wouldn't.
Yeah.
That nothing is wasted. That, the mistakes you've made, certainly not His plan A for you, but hand it over to Him and watch and see what He does. My goodness, that must be such a message for them.
Oh, it's revolutionary. I mean, it's life-changing for me and for them, working with even the energy that God's given us in someone's presence. It's why community and relationship and vulnerability is so, so important and such a high priority biblically, is that our literal cell structure and neural pathways can change in the presence of another person. And when we exchange our stories to one another, we connect on the parts of us that are the same. And that is what's so profound and powerful about any work, not just as a counselor client, but in friendship, in a marriage, in the church as a whole, community. And so I'm always constantly pushing people to look for and identify the people in their life. But how great to champion one another in that, yes, are we deficient in so many ways, or have we failed in so many ways? Do we all have regrets? Of course. But what if we are looking at one another going, but how is God using that in that person's life?
Yeah.
How did that abandonment of their father, or the abuse of that drug, or just that season of depression and just painful loss, how is God setting them up to experience the whole picture of who he is and him become their reality? What are the possibilities when we begin to believe like that and treat others that way versus, where I kind of found some unrest, Susie, is just in this cultural message of our past does not define us and, keep pressing forward, don't look behind, and don't go back, you're not going that way. And while I understand the motivations and I see the good in those, I think that messaging in particular is just not the most helpful to us. Because I can tell you, as someone who studies the brain, it's just physiologically impossible to disconnect ourselves from any moment of our past. And biblically, we are given so much permission and command, really, to own and embrace the path behind us as a very real part of our future.
And even those parts that we'd rather forget, like yesterday ended last night, move on, but instead give that to God and see what he will do with it. You know what you're talking about. You've been through some things. How much would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, well, goodness, I share everything in the book.
Yes.
I mean,
well, when you're talking, let's not give everything away. We want people to go out and get this book. But when you talk about pain, give us one example of a painful experience that you went through that you've seen God use as a transforming tool.
Absolutely. Well, I do have a childhood history of abandonment with my father and really wrestled hard with rejection in my teenage years, which so many of us do. But that was really solidified for me into an identity when I was raped at the age of 15. Oh. And that I kept that secret into my marriage, into my 20s, and that secret festered into, number one, a lie that anyone would reject me at the end of my vulnerability. So if I really gave all of my honesty to someone, ultimately it would not be fully accepted. Mm. And so I went in search of many different things, substance abuse, relationships, unhealthy relationships for sure. But I would even use things like good things to try to distract me and manipulate people into that self-preservation that I needed, which was church. I would use church. I would use religion, serving and all the good things as well to numb this place within me. And I even used my marriage to my husband as this another just Band-Aid on this deep internal wound that I needed to reckon with the Lord. And that then led to the most painful season of my entire life, which was a 3-year adulterous relationship with my best friend's husband. Mm. And this is kind of the storyline of the book, is really going, okay, how did this girl who was a Christian, I don't have the story that I was not a believer, had all this bad stuff happen, and then I loved Jesus. Yeah. And I wanted him to save me. And I still, as a Christian, was involved in some of the most vile, disgusting patterns of habitual sin that are out there. And how did this girl not only come to terms with her sinfulness and own her stuff, but find restoration? Yeah. How did she find the freedom to hold her head high and walk out and now teach women and go to the grocery store and not walk in shame and condemnation and actually change her behaviors and embrace transformation? And so the book walks through all of this series of events for me, but also encouraging the reader biblically on how this works. But for me, it came through this, at the end of this affair, and our phone records were found by my best friend. My husband said the most profound, pivotal words for me where this book was born. And his words to me were, Casey, I do not know how to not love you.
Wow. Wow.
So that changed everything for me, Susie. It really did, because I went from being a Christian in bondage to a Christian in freedom. Wow. Because for the first time in my life, I experienced and understood what it was like to claim the grace of Jesus Christ for me. Yeah. Not just talk about it to everybody else and give it to everybody else, but to believe it for me.
This is such good stuff. We're speaking with Casey Van Norman, author of Nothing Wasted. God Uses the Stuff You Wouldn't. We do need to take a short break. We'll be back with Casey after these words. You're listening to Our Community.